Thanks, Chris. If I start with an apology if some of this sounds slightly rambling, but having both listened to what's been said and looking at who the audience is, and there's quite a number of local authorities, I've sort of slightly rejigged what I'm going to say. Actually, I stand here, my background's a local authority accountant. I'm sure some of you will take exception, but I think for a service directorate in a local authority, I've got the best job in local government by a mile with the programme we're dealing with. And actually, whilst it's called Building Schools for the Future, the title's wrong. Actually, my job's about transforming education, regenerating Kent, the whole bit around the schools agenda. And actually, one bit, Paul had a slide about 5% of the waste. 1/40th of this nation's kids are educated in Kent schools. Turn that round, 1/40th of my state pension and all your state pensions is dependent on what the pupils in our schools actually deliver. And that sort of stays with us. And one of the things sitting there I was reminded of, I can't remember the year, but it must have been pre-97. A forward from John Major on a sports policy talked about there being no such thing as funding problems, just misguided policies. And actually, I think there's a lot of truth in that in terms of what we attempt to achieve. And I'll run through some of that as I go through in terms of what we've looked to do in terms of Kent. It's interesting because the sort of blurb suggested innovative approach to funding. Actually, I've never doubted the funding will be there. It's about actually ensuring our priorities are right. We've got everything lined up, both in terms of our members, our schools, the population, and central government. And therefore, the funding to date has been there. And I'll come back to some of that as we go forward. One of the references actually from Peter Gilroy, my chief exec, who thankfully is now gone. Because one of the things that's abundantly clear from today, and actually it was abundantly clear in Kent anyway from some of the stuff Peter says, is about us being joined up. Actually, the bottom line for me, I've been running the BSF programme since it started in Kent. I've got something like £2 billion to spend, assuming the programme moves forward. Did anyone in Kent, outside of the Education Directorate, take any interest because it was building schools? No. Until the arrival of Total Place, the arrival of the economic downturn, someone began to realise in Kent, actually, if we just join up what we're doing, we've got a regeneration agenda in Kent. Actually, our BSF contract requires three apprenticeships for every £2 million worth of capital spend. Actually, the rest of the organisation understood that was going on? No. The rest of the organisation in terms of Total Place. So there's a real challenge for all of us. And whilst Peter gave, to an extent, a slightly rosy glow, there is a real challenge there in terms of everyone being joined up, both inside the authority but with other authorities. And I'll come on to a couple of those examples as we go through. In terms of funding, and actually understanding the requirements around funding and everything goes with it, sitting there I was reminded when we signed our contract for our first local education partnership on the 24th of October 2008 at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. At 3 o'clock in the afternoon, we were effectively told by all of the advisors, unless we signed by 4 o'clock, the bank swap rates changed on Monday morning and the whole of our deal was off. By which time I'd spent £8 million of the taxpayers' money getting to contract signature. And actually it was almost the first time for our team actually realised almost how crucial the banking industry was to what we were doing. As far as Kent, I'll very quickly run through these. As I said, we've got a 1/40th of the nation's young people. Actually, as Paul said, we have the significant advantage. We are basically politically stable. We had 4 years when we weren't, but only 4 years of the whole of KCC's history have we anything other than blue. And our leader has been the same in terms of dealing with our BSF contract ever since day one when he arrived in 97 when he was elected. So we've got 13 years of sort of solid influence with the politicians. In terms of our school estate, we've got 600 schools, as Peter mentioned this morning, and our capital programme, again, it's about joining up. Those from local authorities, Partnership for Schools have now taken on most of the DCSF education programme. Actually, that all needs to be joined up. We've got a primary capital programme, we've got things like co-location funds. Are we joined up? No, we're not. Are we allowed to be joined up? Actually, at the moment, the message is no. Our line was, can we take 10% off our BSF spend and spend it on a primary? The message was, no, you can't, because it's two separate pots. How bizarre, I get seeing where it's all coming from. So what is our BSF programme? I suddenly realised, for those that aren't of a local authority background in here, a bit of background, Building Schools for the Future, national programme, intention over 15 years is to revamp, remodernise the whole of the secondary education estate in England. Why does it need doing? Simply because all the schools, by and large, are falling apart. They were built in the large numbers were built in the 1960s, other than those that we've got quite a number that are Victorian, which was interesting in terms of an earlier comment. But actually, they've got to be replaced. So actually doing nothing isn't an option. Actually, the options are around how much gets invested and what do we do with it. In terms of the involvement as we go through, this was about ensuring as much as possible we talk to all the parties. I've made reference to joining up in KCC, getting adult education colleagues to join up, youth service to join up, was a real challenge. We actually have had more success on our programme with the district councils, who've recognised what they want to do, particularly around leisure in Kent, and what we're doing through Building Schools for the Future, which will provide, in the end, 100 state-of-the-art leisure sports facilities. And actually the District Council coming in with us. So a number have put their hard cash into our programme. But part of the real challenge is joining up all of those individual funding schemes. But we've now finally signed 2 deals with 2 district councils to actually enable them to take part in our programme. Some of that's actually about what's going to open up the infrastructure in areas of business park estates where actually we're putting a school in. So actually where we put the roadways and that we fund the roadways to get into the school actually has an impact on what happens in terms of regeneration. So that's a real challenge as we go through. The LET model